my usual really terrible jokes. This is one of my favorite dad jokes of all time. So if you have not read this, you should appreciate it. Or just, be like, God damn it, why? Okay, so it's not maybe my best lineup ever, in part mostly because Tom Holtz is out in field work, but he passes his apologies on. He's dragging his exact version of your class out to the field. We don't have dinosaurs to go look at directly in the field, so sorry. We do have very cool fossils on the Oregon coast. We're just going to get to that starting next week. We actually do have some really good Eocene exposures. But if you have not by lab skimmed a paper, like read the abstract at least, and come up with a question, ideally something vaguely to do with your paper, but we'll have time for just sort of general questions about what it's like being a paleontologist or a geologist. I have a decent selection of people from kind of different backgrounds and different things they do or don't do with paleontology. We'll have a state geologist. We'll have a retired animal cruelty officer who is now a emeritus guy at a major national monument, paleontologist. We'll have a good selection of like some random people. We'll probably have a couple folks that can only briefly stop in. My friend Kate is going to try and jump in towards the end on Zoom. She is maybe like the ammonite expert. She's currently writing like the book on ammonites. She's also a spider nut. So if you have spider questions, she was like, haha, I don't work on spiders. And I was like, you literally like spend half your time posting about your tarantulas. So you're still my spider expert. Yeah, we'll have a variety of people from some kind of different backgrounds. One that's kind of fun for me is one of my former students. The first year I did this lab is going to be joining us. Apparently, she must have enjoyed it. So hopefully, it'll be fun. What you will eventually turn in for this lab is a short, kind of long paragraph summary of the article that you read with what was the point of the article, what were your sort of thoughts on the article, what kind of questions did you have coming out of that article and the citation for that article. So that'll be your final product you turn in. I graded most of the midterms yesterday. I have not put them onto the grade thing on Canvas though, so that's why you don't get them back. I might have them done by lab, like as in uploaded. We'll see. They look good. Questions, logistics, etc. Fair. That is to be expected. You can ask some really basic questions about like, how do you read articles like this? What the hell does this mean for a like re-evaluation of an entire group of organisms? Why do we do stuff like that? Those are great questions. The dirty secret is most of the time I look at scientific papers and are like, good God, what the hell are they talking about? Some of that is also going to get into what makes a good paper and what is a not so great paper. Ideally, y'all should be able to look at a scientific paper, read the abstract, and be like, okay, this is what this paper is about. And you should be able to read through the methods and be like, ah, that's how you would do this. Oh, this was the point. If y'all cannot do that, who are college students totally capable of the level of reading that they are supposed to be writing at, that's issues with scientific writing and the people who wrote those papers. Sadly, that happens a lot. It's very easy for folks to get sort of lost in the esoteric weeds. So don't worry about that part. And again, if you have not picked a paper, I have a large selection of some random ones on my laptop. Always fun ones to do. Other questions? Final project, logistics, etc. And y'all look as tired as I feel today. We're still missing Far Madison because apparently they did not make it as far driving as the team planned. They had like 5 hours of driving to do today still. Yeah. It was like somewhere away. Like they were like, she said they had 10 hours of driving to do. Yeah. Pterasaurs. So back to your childhood dinosaur set flying. You probably had our sailback buddy and a childhood plastic dinosaur set. Why is this guy not dinosaur? Proto-mammal. This is a synapsid, not a diapsid. Cute, adorable. You got it right. Keeper of the Dimetrodon for the day. Oh man, I don't have little plastic pterosaurs. That is just actually criminal. Other things that are probably in your plastic dinosaur set, not dinosaurs. Well, some of you guys have mosasaur and plesiosaur. Why are these guys not dinosaurs? This is a lizard, like straight up lizard. Monitor lizards, like Komodo dragons, really close relatives to mosasaurs. Plesiosaurs, a little less sure exactly what they are and where they go. Same thing with ichthyosaurs, a little less sure of exactly what they are and where they go. But they actually show up earlier than dinosaurs. And they have really different skulls and they don't seem to be all that closely related. So in general, if it's swimming, not a dinosaur, except for maybe Spinosaurus. If it's flying and not a bird, it's also not a dinosaur. But where exactly pterosaurs, our flying Mesozoic reptiles, where they go, ooh, that's a little more controversial. This one is pulled from a website called Tetrapod Zoology, or TetZoo for short, so everything with 4 limbs, looking into the biology, ecology, evolutionary history of these organisms. Notice how pterosaurs are actually on this phylogeny sort of twice to hedge their bets. We have what's called squamata. This is lizards and snakes. They're definitely down here. There's some things that get called protosauria. Okay, that's like before dinosaurs, maybe things kind of on the way to dinosaurs. Then we have what we call archosauria. So this unites all of the things with these very similar skulls, often big predators. We have crocodiles, and we have dinosaurs, which include birds. We don't quite know if pterosaurs are just outside of this group and crocodiles are closer relatives to dinosaurs, or if pterosaurs are in that group and not only part of Archosauria, but part of this closer to dinosaurs group. Does anyone remember the weird, silly, somewhat arbitrary difference between our crocky things and our dino-y things? It's a super obscure, weird one. It's an ankle joint. The bones between which the ankle moves are different in a croc and a dinosaur. We have ankles that are more like dinosaurs in terms of the bone that we have the movement between. I'll just add your osteology lab. We have, remember what the name of this bone was? Or what limit? Yeah, it's regulus. So this has got these 2 big sort of keels on it here, lock into the tibia. And this movement here is what lets your ankle do that. The fact that we can move our ankle up and down where it is. If I go up on my toes here, I'm lengthening the length of my limb, but that joint, the bend in between it, is between my tibia, my shin bone, and this bone sticking right out of the top of my head. For a crocodile, it's actually a bit farther down. So this kind of movement in the joint is between multiple different ankle bones as opposed to between the tibia and the ankle bones. So fairly arbitrary. This difference gives us a clue, though, of who's most closely related to who. Catch is, and we'll get into why this is so difficult, where do you put pterasaurs? Most people put pterasaurs as the sister group, so closest branch, closest relative to dinosaurs. Some people put them just outside of our dinosaur group. This is another different websites group. We have they start out back a little farther. We have our tetrapods, amniotic eggs, our diapsids, so number of holes in your head. We have lizards over here. Then we have archosaurs. Sorry, I didn't say that very well. They've put pterasaurs as this closest relative, sister taxon to dinosaurs, and they have all of our crocomorph sort of things. Over here is this other branch. Most common placement, I want to highlight, we don't know for totally sure where pterasaurs go. And part of what makes some of the research on pterasaurs a little bit difficult is maybe more than any other Mesozoic group, these ones attract some of the really weird shit in paleontology. So possibly just because they're very charismatic, they're a fossil group we've known about for a long time. A lot of the fringe ideas in paleontology really come out for pterasaurs. There is a guy, I think maybe personally I feel calling him a paleontologist is a strong claim, named David Peters. And I like to bring this up because if y'all pick a time period in the Mesozoic or even parts of the Paleozoic and are doing Google searches, there's a decent chance you will come across David Peters and some of his websites. Run away screaming. He's like an extreme conspiracy theorist, except for fossils. One of his main things that he does a lot of work on are pterasaurs. He thinks that instead of this, are they just outside of archosaurs with our crocs and dinos, or are they inside and closest to dinos, that they're actually lizards, which it's an interesting idea. There's a lot of skeletal similarities, though, between pterasaurs and dinosaurs, and other characteristics that we're going to get to as well. He then, proposing an idea like this would be okay. He takes this to some very interesting lengths, and that he thinks that they didn't fly for the most part, that the wing structures were used as like display, and he reconstructs them as animals that are like crawling around on all four limbs, and yeah, it gets pretty weird. I would be fine with him just being a fringe nut job, except for that he's also fairly notorious for sort of verbal attacks on scientists, especially young scientists, especially young female scientists. So not super great dude. He started out as a paleo artist and then has decided he's his own researcher. He self-publishes all of his material because nobody else will publish it. The guy who did the giant kraken that was self-aware and artistic and arranging ichthyosaur bones, he's also published on pterasaurs. He published the first pterasaur from Massachusetts. It's a rock, like a triangular shaped rock. It gets worse though. And I don't know what it is about pterasaurs that attracts this more than anything else. There are multiple people, mostly around one particular guy, but there are multiple people who are short-time biblical creationists. And one of the issues with being a short-time biblical creationist is that we do have fossils, and you either have to dismiss fossils as fakes or come up with times and places within the last 6,500 years that those animals lived. And so there have been several fake images produced of pterosaurs that apparently were in the American South during the Civil War and were shot and killed by soldiers. The catch is there was this TV show that came out in the early 90s called Walking with Dinosaurs. And this is the pteranodon from Walking with Dinosaurs, the old male after he like lives his life and dies on the beach, except for with some Civil War soldiers. There's an entire book and a website dedicated to like pterosaur sightings and how they aren't extinct. So just slight warning. Oh, you're giving me this look, but like I've done stuff like gone to Trader Joe's in Southern California and been checking my groceries and been asked what I do and said I'm a paleontologist and had the checker go on a 5-minute rant about how all fossils are made out of plaster and put there by, this one jumped a weird shark, global governments to try and get us to think about like things other than the mind control they're trying to enact upon us. Paleontology maybe has more sort of fringe nut jobs than most other fields and attracts a lot of very controversial ideas. Again, I put this out as a warning because these are things y'all will run into as you start doing a lot of this research. Y'all have all heard my spiel of why like religious and scientific beliefs can absolutely utterly coexist and do not comment or talk upon each other. This is unnecessary. Why? But this is a frequent thing that I'm going to run into. Y'all will run into occasionally too. One of my students at Occidental College, when we had to switch to all online when the pandemic first hit, at the time when I was teaching, we all went on spring break, and then about halfway through spring break got an email that we weren't coming back afterwards and that they were giving us a extra week of spring break to figure out online. It was a total disaster because many students had like left their computers at campus and stuff like that and then weren't allowed back. But I had a student who it turned out his whole family was short-time biblical creationist, and he was taking this class and he had to like headphone and like hide in a literal closet to be able to watch my lectures without getting in horrible trouble. So this is the level of extreme interestingness that is out there. Oh, and I'll add one more thing with David Peters. This one's actually just so stupid, it's really funny. He also thinks the reason non-avian dinosaurs went extinct is because they were too big to have sex on land and needed lakes to have sex in, which he calls sex lakes. And so the dinosaurs went extinct because the climate gets so hot in the end of the Cretaceous, the sex lakes evaporate. I'm not joking. He published a book on this that frequently is in Barnes and Noble. It's called Too Big to Walk. If you all want in on a great paleontology in joke, if you see the book Too Big to Walk in the science section, you put it in the like fantasy or whatever sections. Okay, part of the problem with pterosaurs is they're really unlike anything we have today, and we've known about them from a Western scientific perspective for a really long time. The first discovered totally complete pterosaur skeleton is 1784. That's old. That is so old that the concept of extinction is not an accepted hypothesis at that point. It was just starting to be a thing. They were sending fossils of things like Irish elk all over Europe and being like, have you seen this? I haven't seen this. Like, we have some weird stuff that we get a whole bunch of bones of that there doesn't seem to be running around today. And a lot of European countries were trying to do a lot of exploration in places like the American West and Africa, trying to figure out if you could find something like a lost island of dinosaurs. They find these complete skeletons, and pretty soon this is something that, even with just a little bit of basic anatomy, you can start to be like, this is weird. We've got a skull and jaw that is pretty unlike anything we have today. It's kind of vaguely bird-like, but like has teeth. It's pretty funky looking. We have an arm coming out here, clavicle, humerus, radius ulna, wrist bones, some nice little fingers, and then one of the fingers is incredibly elongate. Well, bats do that, except for with all of their fingers. Birds actually shorten and reduce most of those bones, add a whole bunch of feathers on. So this is interesting. I mean, this is pretty darn weird. And this first fossil that's found is named Pterodactylus. So our whole name for this group, pterasaurs, they often in sort of pop culture just get all called pterodactyls, all starts from this original one that was found. There's many, many complete skeletons of these guys known. They're mostly found in really shallow marine waters. They have these sort of sharp, pointy teeth that stick out a little bit, locked together like this. Probably good at fishing. Not so sure, we're still working on some of that, but likely these were sort of our seagulls of the Mesozoic. And they start out pretty darn early. We have kind of mid-Triassic pterosaurs that are pterosaurs, weird wings, flying. Unless you're David Peters, they definitely look like something that's flying. So this is at the same time or even a little bit earlier than our very earliest dinosaurs. What did our earliest dinosaurs look like? They're bipedal, up on two legs. They're little, they're not very big. They kind of look like tiny, not very fancy meat-eating dinosaurs. They're up on two legs. They have kind of little raptor-y looking heads, some sharp teeth, but they're little guys. These are a highly modified animal. What did they come from? If it has wings, it clearly looks like it's flying here in the Triassic. What are its ancestors? If dinosaurs are also still just doing that same thing, is it those kind of lizardy looking proto-dinosaurs? Is it a sort of crocky thing? Ugh. They're so modified, it's hard to tell what their closest affiliation is. We also have two main groupings within pterosaurs. We have our rhamphorhynchid, that one's always hard for me to say, and we have our pterodactyloid. And these are fairly different shapes and ecologies. They're going to meet their peak diversity in the late Jurassic, where we're going to have both of these groups really well represented. The Rhamphorhynchids are going to go extinct at the end of the Jurassic, and our pterodactyloids are going to continue on until our very, very end of the Cretaceous. Some of this little bit of a decrease, although they're certainly still around in the Cretaceous, maybe because of birds really taking off, but another thing that's a little bit debated. So most diversity in the Jurassic. By the time we get to the end of the Cretaceous, we still have a decent diversity, but they're all really big. So this might be back to this, for whatever reason or however they do it, pterosaurs are better at being a big flying thing than birds were or are. And in contrast to some of the nuttery, there is a very cool website called the Pterasaur Database that is everything you could ever want to know about pterosaurs. This delightful map is every place that we have found pterosaur fossils globally. They're pretty widespread. We haven't found any in Antarctica yet, even though we have dinosaur fossils from there. But in pretty much the entire rest of the world where we have Mesozoic sediments, we're getting different pterosaur fossils. Each one of these lines goes to sort of how many different genera. So Homo sapiens, Homo is our genus. This is the sort of higher up classification. You could have multiple species within each of these. And the rainbow of colors are different groups, different families within pterosaurs.
So you're saying mostly dinosaurs are these the most widespread?
This is every single place we have collected a pterosaur fossil from. This doesn't tell you when that was collected. So our earliest one is from right here in what is now Germany for over 100 years. I think we only knew about European ones and then some of the ones from the middle of North America. The South American and certainly Australian and African ones are fairly recent paleontology. We are starting to do a lot more paleontology in even Antarctica. It's got its issues, as we will hear a little bit about during our debates as well. Originally, we just didn't do paleontology outside of sort of white Western areas. And then for quite a long time, it was extremely colonialist. Like, we're going to send our museum team in, we're going to go dig up the bones and then leave. And often there was sort of no even interaction with local peoples wherever they were going. We are trying to change that. We'll get into some of the issues continuing with this, though. But really good questions. Global diversity of pterosaurs, we do still have some really high areas of diversity. There's a couple sites in Europe that have high diversity, one in the UK, one in Germany. Of course, China has some of the best fossil sites for basically every single age there is. The highest diversity of pterosaurs in any one place ever appears to be at one site in China. Again, these are different genera. This is not unheard of, though. Think about places that like birders really love to go to that have this huge, huge, huge number of birds. Could be something like that. We also have a couple spots in South America that are really, really diverse. One of our sort of unfortunate catches with both of these is, anyone remember what happened to the type specimen, the one used to name and describe and compare for Spinosaurus? Yep, World War II bombing. Several of the original specimens and some of the really good ones of our German pterosaurs were lost. And actually, the UK lost a decent number of fossils that were like large things in slabs that were harder to move during bombings during World War II as well, including some of the pterosaurs and especially a bunch of their ichthyosaurs. We had Mary Anning, one of the first female paleontologists, collecting mostly Mesozoic marine reptiles in the UK. She also found the first pterasaur ever found in the UK. Both those specimens were destroyed in bombing. Okay, now we're going to have a little bit more like current sad loss of fossils. Brazil has a very high diversity of pterosaurs. And Brazil in the last sort of 20 years has been a fairly hot spot of paleontology really taking off and going a lot more. They've had pretty good fossil laws on the books for many decades, helping to protect fossils as a resource. However, despite the fact they've had really great researchers doing a lot of work there, they haven't necessarily had a lot of governmental support or funding. So in 2017 or 18, I think 2018, the Brazilian National Natural History Museum burned to the ground. It was an old historic building. They'd been lobbying for funds for a very long time. They did not get them. It was like a complete loss for the whole building. Very few specimens were recovered. One specimen that was recovered was the oldest human bones fossil, technically, from South America. So that was at least great. Unfortunately, many of our types of a whole bunch of these South American pterosaurs were lost. So not only are we going to get into more issues of why they're hard to tell what they are, we don't have a great track record globally with apparently holding on to many of these fossils. So what makes a pterosaur when we look at these skeletal features, which are unfortunately often all we have? Pterosaurs are going to be the first thing that figures out hollow bones. We talked about birds on Monday. What's great about hollow bones? Lighter. If you're going to fly, you got to lighten the load. What's bad to a paleontologist about hollow bones? They break really easily. They're much harder to fossilize. So unless our pterosaurs like fly over the ocean, die, sink, get buried really fast, it makes it a lot harder for these things to end up in our fossil record complete, well represented. You know, a lot of times it's like, well, there's a pterosaur, but we don't have enough material to identify it. Another slight modification is going to be this breastbone. So we have a sternum. This is the sort of little set of bones that are right here in your chest. Your ribs attach on the edge of your spine. They come around to the front, and there is a cartilaginous connection that does not ossify, turn to bone, until your late 20s. This is why 20-year-olds getting in car accidents actually have higher, I made this dark, but higher mortality rates than like 30 and 40-year-olds, because your breastbone isn't fully ossified. It's easier to break. They super beef them up because this is where your flight muscles are attaching. Think about doing push-ups. You're using those muscles in kind of the same way. Your pectorals are the muscles that are doing that. If you're now moving your entire arm to propel yourself for flight, the more muscles you can attach here, the more power you have. They're also something birds do to continue to lighten the load and make yourself a little more sturdy for landing from flying, going to fuse almost all of their ankle and foot bones together. Okay, so how did we classify our like dinos versus crocs? Yeah, this is a big problem for paleontologists. This happens really early. As soon as pterosaurs are flying, this is something you do when you're flying. You fuse a whole bunch of stuff. If you fuse bones together, you can kind of get rid of the extra bells and whistles. You can make them really light. It's great for flying. It's really annoying when you're trying to figure out what the hell these things were. And we use characteristics of things like ankle bones for many of their other matching things together. We'll continue making it worse. We know, given kind of what they're most similar, a lot of other skeletal anatomy, that these are diapsids. They come from our like lizards and crocs and bird and dinosaur group. But that whole like fuse things, get rid of extra bone so that you can stay really light, they take this to an extreme. This is a cast of a pterasaur skull. Can just see absolutely straight through this thing. So some of them even do this to a greater extreme. This is a complete skull of this type of pterosaur. We have our like nasal hole, eye hole, and other skull holes all just fused into giant hole through its head. That's cool for less bone, lightening the load. What's maybe a disadvantage to your entire skull being like holes? Yeah, like if something bites this guy in the head, there's not a lot of bone left to protect things. Also, the brain's in this little part back here. Yeah, there's like very little space for brain in these creatures. It's a bit of a trade-off. It's also really frustrating because paleontologists use primarily skull features, maybe over anything else, for identifying different groups of animals. So they've gotten rid of basically like 3/4 of the things we use to try and determine who's closest relative. It's fascinating. I mean, these are animals that were highly adapted for some very specific things. Flight is such a cool, weird thing to have, a major innovation in life. Just where these guys sit in our family tree, how they relate to even each other can be pretty complicated to figure out. So by the middle Triassic, these are our earliest pterosaurs. We have complete skeletons. We even have some with some soft tissue preserved. These are all of the bones. These are sort of bacterial breakdown stains from the wing membranes. So we even have an idea of the shape of the wing membranes, the little tail blip. This is a lot like tails on a kite, something that can help you with steering and navigation. They're out in marine sediments, so fine-grained sediments. They're a little ways out in water. They flew over the ocean and died and fell into it, buried in sediment. We have these modifications. We have like one big old giant hole in the skull. We have big breastbone. We have fused ankle bones. These folded back big giant wing bones. Much hole in head, little tiny brains, nice, probably fish-eating teeth. How did these guys evolve flying? What were our hypotheses for the evolution of flight in birds? Ground up or tree down. Or we have the one other really one, which is our wing-assisted incline running, using wings to basically like hold myself against a surface so that I can walk up a vertical surface. How does that work for a pterosaur? Probably we can't do the wing-assisted incline running. So I guess we're back to ground up, tree down, but like actually, we do have some really Triassic things that might be, they don't perfectly answer the how or the why. I should say they don't answer the why, they do start to answer the how. Some of our earliest critters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, little piggies, start to modify and lengthen some of these fingers, reduce some over others. This is what we call digit 5. So this is looking at this arm. Your digits are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've super reduced our little pinky there. The single finger bone that makes up the majority of the wing. We keep other little fingers for little claws to grab things up at the top. It's your ring finger. Weird, right? So bats. Bats keep a little thumb hook. So they have number 1 as a little hook for moving along, holding on to things. It's nice to still have something kind of handy. And then they take their other 4 fingers and greatly elongate them to make their wings. Birds still kind of leave little tiny thumb hook. If you look at a chicken wing, occasionally it'll have that like little tiny nubbin spike. That's actually the remnant of the thumb claw. They're at the base of our bird family tree. They fuse all of these into a kind of little extending nub, but they're like still using all 4 of them fairly equally. This is a weird option. Ring finger for your entire wing that you're extending out. They managed to add 1 extra bone within this sort of digit as well. We mostly have 3, although you have 1, 2, 3. They also get that extra bone in their middle finger. So these instead have 4 bones. We'll look at how animals do that quite a bit with whales, because whales are going to add quite a few extra bones onto their fingers. But so we at least have a decent idea of how these wings developed. And when were our earliest birds? Middle Jurassic. So these guys get the jump on birds by flight by tens of millions of years. Middle Triassic, we have flying pterasaurs. The biology term for free-powered flight is volant, which is kind of a cool sounding word as opposed to being a glider. This is Darren Nash from Tetrapod Zoology's illustration of sort of what this might have looked like fleshed out. We have our little 3 extra fingers, the ring finger extending way out, and this membrane that connected from this bone all along the arm, along the side of the body, and in the case of many pterosaurs, connected all the way down onto the leg. This sort of increases your area of your wing. If I just have my arm like a bird, I have sort of limited total surface area. Surface area gives me lift for flapping. If I extend this down, I have more surface area. If you've watched videos of the folks who do the squirrel suit diving, it connects hand to foot so that they have a greater surface area to not just plummet out of the sky. A lot of the pterosaurs that we have soft body imprints for also have some sort of webbings between their tail and legs. Again, just increasing your surface area so that you can resist the forces of gravity slightly more. We've known about pterosaurs for quite a long time. We didn't know how they moved for quite a long time. Most things that fly need to land at basically some point. All things that fly need to land at some point. An albatross can stay airborne for literally weeks on end by riding currents, but stuff still needs to land. These are quadruped animals. Generally, you can't do things like lay your eggs while you're still flying. So the question was, when pterosaurs landed, did they walk on 4 legs or 2 legs? This was a really heated question until the year 2000. We found pterosaur trackways. So fossil footprints. We've got our cast of a dino footprint. We have the cool slab in the back window of like little tiny dino relatives running across the sand dune. We found multiple trackways in this sort of mud cracked area with two different shaped footprints. There's sort of hilariously cartoony-ish little back feet. And then their front foot, we get a little print like that. So these are the three fingers sticking up and the edge of the wing coming off of that. Clearly they're walking on 4 feet. There's even a trackway now found that shows them landing. So flapping, running with their hind feet, and then coming down onto 4 feet and running along. That's pretty darn cool, because how do birds land? They just plop on with 2 feet. This is an entirely different biomechanics. Your arm, your wing has to do some really different things to be able to land and run. Many of these things were probably pretty adept on the ground. I think they sort of folded their wings back. So you're using those 3 fingers with your ring finger folded up and projected back beyond you. Probably gives me arthritis if I think about it too long. But this is a question where we can ask something in paleontology, and when we find the right fossils, we can make a lot of these answers eventually. Well, that doesn't solve all of our what we call biomechanics, so the mechanics of how biology functions and works. Because some of the pterosaurs get like stupid big. Quetzalcoatlus, named for Quetzalcoatl, one of the Aztec deities, gets up to the size of small airplanes. We have numerous fossils, common fossils of Quetzalcoatlus. The one bit of pterosaur fossils from Oregon is Quetzalcoatlus. It's sadly only like part of the ring finger, which is enough to be like, wow, mega super giant pterosaur. But not great for telling a lot of detail beyond that. Hopefully we find more in Oregon. But so we have something flying the size of a small airplane. What are your challenges to flying and being the size of a small airplane? Landing sounds kind of scary. Taking off sounds pretty scary. We're starting to get to the point where that's a lot of animal to yeet itself into the sky and have big enough muscles to self-propel it. We're quite sure they're flying, because when stuff stops flying, why would you grow giant wings that takes a huge amount of energy? When animals become flightless, they reduce or lose wings quite quickly evolutionarily. We have seen this in birds over and over and over again. We'll talk about a few examples next week. We've even seen this in bats. There is an island in, I have lost words, Oceania, I think that's the term for the right area. Papua New Guinea, thank you, brain. Sorry, Papua New Guinea. There's a tiny island that there are not flying bats on. They act like rodents and like scuttle around in the underbrush and climb trees and are basically adorable and have reduced their wings a whole bunch. There wasn't things to eat them. They didn't have rodents as competitors. They don't really need to fly around to catch all of their bugs. And flying takes a shit ton of energy, so why would you fly if you don't have to? So these guys have big old wings. We're pretty sure they're flying. Enormous animal. Our so far lowest mass estimates, trying to take into account hollow bones, air pockets invading things like the neck, basically putting as little meat as you possibly could onto this thing. Our most conservative weight estimates are still like 250 pounds. Birds that weigh 250 pounds. Ostriches. How great at flying are ostriches? Thank you for shaking your heads. I'm always worried somebody will be like, yeah. What's our biggest flying bird today? This is a delightful piece of trivia. By mass and wingspan, if that helps. An albatross. Albatross are surprisingly big. If one was like feet on the desk, their bodies are like this big, a big old head like that. Their wingspans are like wider end of my desk to about here for our largest albatross. Like that's a big, big animal. They weigh in the tens of pounds, not in the hundreds of pounds. So we don't quite have the physics totally figured out of like, how does something like this fly? One hypothesis that has plenty of issues is, okay, once you get this airborne, it has a huge amount of surface area. It's probably pretty darn good at gliding. We can get gliders airborne and they stay airborne for a really long time. But how do you get a glider airborne? You jump off a cliff. Literally one of our hypotheses that these things just like waddled up to the edge of a cliff and like tipped off into space. That's great, but like we have a ton of fossils of these guys in Montana, which interior Cretaceous seaway, but like not big cliffs all over the park. So they're landing in places that don't seem to have huge cliffs. Probably that means maybe it was a little bit more work, but this kind of has to have been an animal that could probably take off. Maybe it needed a large open area, fly, and we find a fairly large, extensive range for some of these really big pterosaurs. And these are going to be the last ones that are still around in the end of the Cretaceous. Here's a baby sauropod dinosaur being eaten by one of these groups of Quetzalcoatlus. In fact, in our most productive by numbers and maybe most famous paleontological geologic formation in the US, the Hill Creek Formation, we have Quetzalcoatlus. The Hill Creek Formation outcrops over most of Montana, the Dakotas, Wyoming. It's very, very Utah. It's very extensive. And it is this last little slice of the Cretaceous. It has our end Cretaceous boundary, which we will talk about on Monday when I get to kill things all over again. All of our T-Rex fossils in the world come from the Hell Creek Formation. Triceratops, really, 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 really common. There's a Pachycephalosaur, one of these ones with the domed head. There's some raptors. There's some Struthomymus. There's a variety of some of these other dinosaurs. There's an ankylosaur. But the big story of this T-Rex, Triceratops, and Quetzalcoatlus. This is also pretty much to scale. Our T-Rex should be maybe a little bit chunkier, but these are really, really tall animals. This is like a giraffe height animal. One year at Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, somebody made a puppet life-sized of Quetzalcoatlus that took multiple people with like sticks to operate this thing so that it would walk around sort of what we think they actually moved like. It was really cool and mildly terrifying, actually. And one other funny conference thing, the first year of the pandemic, everything was entirely online, as you'll obviously know. Our paleontology conference was entirely online. The company they got to host it had a profanity filter in place on their website, which banned the word bone, first of all. Slightly problematic at a paleontology conference, but it also banned hell. So everyone who worked on any of these dinosaurs or the ecology during the end of the Cretaceous had to say heck creek. That was hilarious. Okay, back to our pterosaurs. They're really, 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 really diverse. We have giraffe-sized, height-wise pterosaurs. We have ones that are like tiny little mouse-sized pterosaurs. And then there's all of the cool, super weird things they do with their heads. I love this artist reconstruction of different shaped skulls we've found. There is one that quite literally has super giant triangle prongs sticking off of its head. There's many with these huge crests on top. Some of these crests are very flat. Some of them have sort of inflated areas. They have a variety of bizarre teeth. There is even, there's a closer picture of it somewhere, this guy right here. It's basically baleen. The jaw on this pterosaur, oh God. It's this like feathery, filtery material about that big. We think this is an animal that flew around and like swung its head through the water and filtered out krill or like little plankton and stuff. So we have things with like scary pointy teeth. We have things with scary different pointy teeth. We have things that basically just have beaks and have lost all of their teeth. There's things with short faces. There's things with mega stabby long beaks. There's things that look like demented nutcrackers. There's ones with sort of big nose ends. There's ones with pointy nose ends. They range in size again from like this big to mega giant big. Here's another artist reconstruction looking at some of these guys. Wing shape stays a little more similar, but here's our delightfully strange, this is bone, giant prongs sticking off the top. These are animals that are filling a lot of different niches in an ecosystem. Yes. There's even sexual dimorphism. So in some of the sites where we have a whole bunch of fossils, we can start to look at like, wow, there's two different shapes. One of them has a bigger headpiece, and the other one doesn't seem to have as big of a headpiece. Maybe they're boys and girls. At Society of Vertebrate Paleontology conference one year, there was a talk titled Pterodactyl Sex, which was very, very well attended. They found a fossil with an egg. Given the placement of the egg and what happens when birds die and get buried, they think this was an egg that had not yet been laid. When this animal died and was buried, this sort of forced the egg out. We don't think this is like an egg that got eaten because it's completely whole and there's no signs of like acid etching on it. This was one of the ones that had this slightly simpler skull shape, so good indication that that one's a girl. Pterosaur eggs are even rarer than dinosaur eggs, though. We don't have a ton of them. Maybe we can't answer this question for every single pterosaur that looks weird, but we are pretty sure at least some of them were sexually dimorphic. So adding to this incredible diversity. Sexual dimorphism also often hints at things like maybe living in groups, competition for mates, even parental care. So if you're really trying to impress a mate, one of the things that often goes along with that is a bit more investment in the development of the offspring. These animals, likely given this range of shape and form and characteristics and size, occupied a lot of different ecologies. This is very much the new cool frontiers of paleontology, is moving paleontology away from its sort of historical stamp collecting style of like, yay, we found a new one, here's another new one, to what were these things doing? And the more we look at pterosaurs, the more that question is convoluted, messy, and weird. Some of these super weird giant head crests have sinuses, so sort of spongy areas of bone that air can travel through, that invade really far up into these skulls. This is what we see in birds that make really weird sounds, and plenty of other animals that make weird sounds. So this might have been having sounds that could be heard over really great distances, having complex song, complex sounds. That might also go along with animals that are living in groups or doing parental care and need to communicate more. For really neat niches, there have been a couple fossils now found that have little sort of furry filaments sticking off of them. These look similar to feathers, but they lack the sort of central shaft in a feather that all of the little pieces come off of. But little sort of fluffy filaments like a baby chick, that kind of like downy structure. Seems like it's something that a lot of pterosaurs had. Every time we keep finding better soft-bodied preservation, they're kind of fuzzy. What's really cool with that is feathers or like proto-feather-like structures probably actually show up even before dinosaurs. So this group, maybe this is one of the arguments for having pterosaurs and dinosaurs together, because we have no evidence of furry, fuzzy, fluffy crocs. But maybe these guys go together and their ancestors had some of these characteristics. This is a relatively recently found pterosaur. This is about twice life size. These are really tiny ones. What kind of animal does this look like it's trying really hard to be? This looks like a bat, except for this is actually before bats. Really short face, these long little feathery things that might have been sensory for like feeling bugs around you. Enormous eyes relative to the skull size. What are really big eyes good for? Probably seeing in maybe low light. So these might have been nocturnal tiny bug hunters, like bats. That's super cool. An ecology we see today being used in the past. And despite things like Pterodactylus, our first ones we found, being found in these marine sediments and probably fairly similar to gulls, we're getting more and more evidence, even though most of our fossils are still coming from these shallow marine environments, that these were ecologically really diverse animals. These are all not just trackways with some footprints, these have feeding traces. So some of these animals may have been like shorebirds we have today. This particular one, these are all little feet as they're like walking around on the mud. And all of these little dots are little bill stab marks. So stabbing into the sediment, looking for worms, clams, crabs, various things like that. Got a couple other examples of that. We have some of these sort of scratch marks. We have ones with the big teeth that sort of fit like that. We've started to hint at maybe stomach contents in some of these. They may even have been doing things like modern day pelicans or gannets, diving into water, pursuing fish. I thought this was a very cool artist illustration of hypothetically pterosaurs diving into the ocean, using their wings to sort of propel them underwater to hunt for fish. They've even got an advantage over birds on this, in that if they have skin membranes, you're a little less worried about getting really wet and being able to fly well. Not only can we answer some of the questions of what pterosaurs were eating, turns out a lot of other things were also eating pterosaurs. So this, admittedly not super pretty fossil, this is a vertebrae from a pterosaur with a sharp tooth stuck in it. Sharks shed their teeth, but they keep growing new teeth throughout their lives. So they were apparently at least occasionally eating pterosaurs. There are now multiple specimens with shark teeth embedded in them. So at least periodically, this is a hypothetical reconstruction. Maybe these guys were plunging into the water to feed. Maybe they just flew too close to the surface of the water and got eaten by a shark. They even apparently got eaten by fish sometimes. So this is, it didn't go super well for either of them, but a large fish with a pterosaur sort of wedged into the front of its mouth. Apparently it literally bit off more than it could chew. Now, for our last couple minutes, I want to play part of Prehistoric Planet, because this is a TV show that came out last year. The part 2 is coming out May 22nd, and I'm super excited. But this was a really important show because they actually consulted with multiple dozen paleontologists. This is hypothetical situations that are at the cutting edge of our knowledge currently. And they have multiple different pterosaur scenes. Oops. Again, actual fossil. Weird. What went into forming part of the seed. Really do think these animals have gathered together.
traumatic injuries with probable pterasaur on pterasaur.
Interesting. Because the large animals are relatively uncontrolled.
And there are big males, like demonstrate female behavior around males to hold up the charade.
Nature shows.
Because it seems in short, it's amazing.
Time. Okay, good. I have slightly more time. There's one other section of episode. So what was really cool with this show is that it's sort of nature documentary style for different ecosystems. Oops, no.
But the world's known is coloured by plants and trees.
Why is it not showing?
This prehistoric planet is a green planet. Interesting.
They have to have the babies in peril. It's a nature show. This is the Carnage Forest.
Opportunity.
Where's the big boys?
Headings and Microsoft. So we take on corrects 7:15.
Not even the biggest ones of these. Yes, they're just absurd.
It is in fact a terrace. The red cloud is windy, but here, as it stalks through the trees, it has become comfortable.
A lot of the big ones we think are probably mostly living on the ground, but could fly.
This is one of the it's really from the south of the stage. This is the headings and everything. And there is nowhere else here that it should open its gigantic wings, which are over 30 feet across.
Very deep.
Many of the forest's permanent residents regularly come down here because the plants are coated with sea spray and are a welcome source of sun.
Okay, there's lots more pterosaur scenes hidden in many of these. We can play them in the background for another lab or something, but you are out of time. I will see you for lab. And again, this is supposed to be like very, very low pressure. I want y'all to get to like meet some paleontologists and geologists other than me. Since I know there are a few of you that I'm like vaguely corrupting in the direction of geology. Come to the rock side, it rocks. Yes. Some of the oops, let me and